By the window of my office overlooking Manhattan skyscrapers, I make final adjustments to tomorrow's client presentation. My fingers dance across the keyboard with practiced precision, though inside I feel hollow. I've made a name for myself as marketing director at one of New York's leading advertising agencies, the perfect bob haircut, designer glasses, and tailored suits projecting the image of success that everyone sees. Below, Central Park stretches out like a painting, families and couples enjoying the late afternoon sun. I catch my reflection in the window, superimposed over them like a ghost unable to join their world. Elizabeth, that's brilliant work. The client is going to love it, says James, my boss, patting my shoulder as he passes by my office. I smile and thank him, the mask perfectly in place. I am always valued and respected at work. But it wasn't always like this. I glance at the small antique clock on my desk, the only item I kept from my marriage. It stopped working years ago, frozen at 3:27. I never bothered to fix it. Sometimes I think it stopped the moment Scott first looked me in the eyes and said those words that would haunt me for years. It's not my fault we can't have children. It's yours. 5 years ago, I divorced Scott Foster, a respected obstetrician at New York Memorial Hospital. The official reason, the one that followed me like a curse to every family gathering since, Elizabeth couldn't have children. These words carved themselves into my identity like a brand, especially when spoken in my mother's voice. If only you had tried a little harder, Elizabeth. You were married to a doctor, for heaven's sake. Why didn't you get proper treatment? Such a shame you couldn't continue the family line. My mother Eleanor has dedicated her life to building the perfect family, 3 generations of Graces appearing in community newsletters and holiday cards, each member successful and fulfilled. My failure had wounded her pride deeply. My father Richard was no different, a retired business executive who feared nothing more than exposing family flaws to the world. Look how wonderful Daniel is, the man Abigail has brought home. They'll certainly give us adorable grandchildren, my mother would say at family gatherings, while I struggled to maintain my smile. Abigail, my younger sister, works as a nurse at the same hospital as Scott. She has always been doted on as the perfect daughter, the one who would never disappoint. Elizabeth, are you coming to the engagement party next weekend? My mother's voice through the phone carries its usual mix of command and artificial sweetness. I'm standing on my balcony, wine glass in hand, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settles. What engagement party? I ask, though something inside me already knows the answer. Abigail and Scott, of course. They're getting married next month. Didn't you get the invitation? I sent it to your office last week. The wine glass nearly slips from my fingers. I set it down carefully on the railing, willing my hand to stop trembling. Scott? My ex-husband Scott. Well, technically yes. My mother's voice turns defensive. But they've been together for almost 2 years now. You know how these things happen, they work together. They got close. It's not like you were still interested in having a relationship with him. 2 years. They've been together for 2 years. Scott and I have been divorced for 5. The math isn't difficult. I understand, Mom. I say quietly, though I don't. Not really. The wedding is next month at the Grand Riverside. It would mean a lot to Abigail if you came. But please, Elizabeth, her voice drops to a whisper, as if sharing a secret, do try not to stand out. This day is about Abigail. After hanging up, I walk back inside and open my desk drawer. The invitation is there, unopened among my work mail. Thick cream cardstock with gold embossing. Abigail always did have expensive taste. I trace my finger over the names, Scott Foster and Abigail Grace. My ex-husband and my sister. Later that evening, my friend Laura calls to check in. When I tell her about the invitation, she's outraged. You're not seriously considering going, are you? After what he did to you? After what they both did? I don't know, I answer honestly. To honor my grandmother's words, the only person in my family who ever truly understood me, I've tried to maintain some connection to my family, no matter how painful. Value your family, but value yourself too, she used to say. But where's the line? 3 weeks before the wedding, I'm buying coffee at a small cafe near the hospital where Scott works. I don't usually come to this neighborhood anymore, but a client meeting brought me here. As I wait for my order, a woman in her 30s bumps into me, spilling her tea. "I'm so sorry," she says, dabbing at the small splash on my coat. "It's nothing," I assure her. Something about her seems familiar, the nervous energy, the way she keeps glancing at the hospital across the street. "Are you a patient there?" I ask, nodding toward the building. She hesitates. "Yes, Dr. Foster's patient, actually." A shadow crosses her face at the mention of his name. "I know him," I say carefully. "I'm Elizabeth." Her eyes widen slightly. "You're his ex-wife?" "He mentioned you once, said you couldn't." She stops herself, embarrassed. "That I couldn't have children," I finish for her. "It's what he tells everyone." She looks down at her cup. "He told me the same thing about me. That's why my husband left. But I got a second opinion last month. There's nothing wrong with me." Her voice is barely audible. "I just thought you should know." Before I can respond, she hurries away, leaving me standing there with cold coffee and a mind racing with possibilities I had never considered. 2 days later, I'm having dinner alone at a restaurant near my apartment when I spot them at a corner table, Scott and an older woman I recognize as Margaret Dawson, the hospital records administrator. Their conversation appears intense. Scott's hand grips her wrist tightly as he speaks, his face a mask of controlled anger. Margaret looks frightened. When Scott leaves for the restroom, Margaret quickly gathers her things to leave. On impulse, I follow her outside. "Margaret?" "It's Elizabeth, Grace. Do you remember me?" She turns, startled. "Elizabeth." Of course I remember. Her eyes dart nervously back toward the restaurant. "I can't talk to you here." "What's going on? Why was Scott threatening you?" "Tomorrow. Noon. The bench by the East Boat Pond in Central Park." She presses a business card into my hand. "Don't call me. Don't tell anyone." Then she hurries away, disappearing into the evening crowd. The next day is unseasonably cold for spring. I sit on the designated bench, watching children sail toy boats across the pond. Memories flood back, Scott, and I used to talk about bringing our children here someday. "Thank you for coming." Margaret appears beside me, bundled in a gray coat. She looks older than I remember, worn down by worry. "What's this about, Margaret?" She takes a deep breath. "I'm retiring next month. 30 years at Memorial, and I wanted to leave with a clean conscience." She hands me a manila envelope. "These are Scott's medical records from 11 years ago. 3 years before you married him." My hands tremble as I open it. Inside are test results, physician notes, and a clear diagnosis: severe male infertility. The date stamps show it was 3 years before our wedding. "This can't be right," I whisper, though deep down I know it is. It is. Scott has a condition that makes natural conception nearly impossible. He's known since he was 30. Margaret's voice is firm. "He knew before he married you, Elizabeth." The world seems to tilt beneath me as memories realign themselves. The years of fertility treatments. The specialists who couldn't explain why. The growing accusations. The way Scott would comfort me publicly while privately suggesting I wasn't trying hard enough, that something was wrong with me. "There's more," Margaret continues. "He tried to have these records restricted and altered. Here's a copy of his email to our IT department." She shows me another document, a request to modify specific data. "And your sister Abigail, she's had access to these records for at least 2 years. She knows Elizabeth." I feel physically ill. "My parents." Abigail told them last year. I overheard them discussing it when they visited Scott at the hospital. "They asked her not to tell you." "Why are you telling me this now?" Because I've watched you being called defective, being alienated from your family based on a lie. Because I'm tired of watching Scott use his position to manipulate vulnerable women. She stands up. The evidence is yours. What you do with it is up to you. After she leaves, I sit alone, remembering the most painful moments of my marriage. 3 years into our marriage, lying on an examination table, another failed treatment. Scott standing over me, his face a perfect mask of supportive husband, but his words cutting. Maybe we should consider that this isn't meant to be. Perhaps there's something deeper wrong with you that the tests aren't showing. My mother at Christmas dinner. Well, at least Abigail is dating a doctor now too. Maybe she'll have better luck giving us grandchildren. My father nodding in agreement while Scott placed a sympathetic hand on mine, playing the role of devoted husband suffering through my inadequacy. The day Scott asked for a divorce, his carefully rehearsed speech about wanting a real family, about not being able to waste more years. The pamphlets for psychological counseling he left on the counter, suggesting my inability to conceive, was taking a toll on my mental health. All lies, all carefully constructed to protect himself and throw the burden onto me. And my sister knew. My parents knew. Everyone knew except me. The week before the wedding, Abigail's bridesmaids throw her a bachelorette party at an upscale cocktail bar in Manhattan. I'm surprised to receive an invitation likely my mother's doing, maintaining appearances. After 3 glasses of champagne, I find Abigail alone by the restrooms. Congratulations, I say, raising my glass. You and Scott make a perfect couple. She smiles, but her eyes remain wary. Thank you for coming, Elizabeth. I wasn't sure you would. Why wouldn't I? It's not every day your sister marries your ex-husband. Her smile falters. It just happened, you know. We didn't plan it. Didn't you? I step closer. Tell me, Abigail, when did you first learn about Scott's fertility issues? The color drains from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I think you've known for at least 2 years. Maybe longer. I pull out my phone and show her a photo of one of the documents. Margaret Dawson gave me Scott's medical records. Abigail grabs my wrist, pulling me further from the party. Keep your voice down. She glances around nervously. What do you want, Elizabeth? Money? Recognition? Is this why you came tonight? I want to know why. Why you would let our family believe I was defective. Why you would watch me suffer when you knew the truth. The alcohol seems to loosen her tongue. You always had everything, she hisses. Perfect Elizabeth. Dad's favorite. Mom's pride. The successful one. The beautiful one. The smart one. Each word drips with years of resentment. For once in my life, I wanted something you couldn't have. So you took my husband and continued his lie. She laughs, a bitter sound. He was already lying to you when I found out. I just didn't correct him. She sways slightly, the champagne affecting her. Besides, what difference does it make? You two were already over. At least I'll never have to worry about being blamed like you were. One of her friends appears, phone in hand, having apparently recorded part of our conversation. Everything okay? Abby, we're about to do the gifts. Abigail straightens, her mask sliding back into place. Everything's fine. My sister was just leaving, weren't you, Elizabeth? 2 days before the wedding, I make one last attempt. I drive to my parents' house in Connecticut, the large colonial where Abigail and I grew up. My mother answers the door, surprised to see me. Elizabeth? We weren't expecting you until the rehearsal dinner. I need to talk to you and Dad. It's important. In their immaculate living room, surrounded by family photos where my presence has gradually diminished over the years, I show them the medical records. This is what you wanted to show us? Your ex-husband's private medical information. My father's voice is cold with disapproval. Did you know about this? Did you know Scott has been infertile all along? That he blamed me for something that was his issue. My mother won't meet my eyes, but my father stands rigidly by the fireplace. What's done is done, Elizabeth. What purpose does dragging this up serve now? You did know, I whisper, the final betrayal sinking in. Abigail told you, and you still let everyone believe it was my fault. Scott is a respected physician, my mother finally speaks. These things are complicated. Medical issues aren't always black and white. This isn't about medicine. This is about lying to me, all of you, for years. My father approaches, looking at the documents more carefully. For a moment, I see doubt in his eyes, maybe even regret. But then my mother speaks. We can't possibly upset things now. The wedding is in 2 days. What would people think? Please, Elizabeth, let it go. For the family's sake. I leave their house knowing I'm truly alone in this. My family has chosen appearance over truth, comfort over justice. As I drive away, I make my decision. I will attend the wedding, but I won't remain silent any longer. The Grand Riverside Hotel ballroom is decorated with thousands of white roses and crystal chandeliers, casting a soft, elegant light over the 150 guests already seated for Scott and Abigail's wedding ceremony. Following my mother's instruction to not stand out, I wear a simple dove gray dress and sit at the very edge of the family section. Still, my presence draws curious glances from relatives and friends who know the complicated history. You look pale. Are you all right? Aunt Martha approaches, her words carrying more curiosity than concern. Yes, I'm fine, I smile gently. It's a lovely ceremony. But my heart is in turmoil. Watching Abigail float down the aisle in her designer white dress, beaming with joy, and seeing Scott standing at the altar, the man who was once my husband, is more painful than I expected. As they exchange vows, I quietly observe, remembering my own wedding 5 years ago. Back then, I never imagined a day like this would come. You could try smiling a bit more, my father whispers harshly. Everyone thinks you're in a bad mood. I nod silently and take a sip of champagne, feeling the weight of the documents in my clutch bag. Throughout the reception, I watch Scott work the room, the perfect, charming groom, occasionally casting nervous glances my way. He knows I'm unpredictable, the only variable in his perfectly orchestrated life. Midway through the reception, the host announces it's time for speeches. First come my parents, standing together on the stage, offering words of blessing for their daughter and new son-in-law. Abigail, you have always been our pride, my mother says, seemingly overcome with emotion. Scott, we couldn't be happier to welcome you into our family. Next, friends give their speeches, and the venue fills with warm laughter. Then, suddenly, Abigail stands up and takes the microphone from the host. Everyone, thank you for coming today. Her voice echoes throughout the hall. Since this is such a special day, I want to share something with all of you. She looks directly at me, a warning in her eyes. Actually, Scott and I have an announcement. We're already expecting our first child. The venue erupts in cheers and applause. I feel the blood drain from my face. This calculated announcement, it's the final nail, designed to forever cement the narrative that I was the problem. Isn't that wonderful? Aunt Martha whispers to me. And to think, all those years. I close my eyes, desperately holding back tears. At that moment, the host's voice resonates. Now, let's hear a few words from the sister of the bride. Elizabeth. My eyes snap open at the sudden invitation. The venue falls silent, and all eyes turn to me. The color drains from Abigail's face, and she hurriedly tries to stop it. No, my sister has nothing prepared. But it's too late. The guests are looking at me with expectation. I take a deep breath and slowly stand up, feeling my legs trembling. I walk with dignity toward the stage. Scott is visibly disturbed, gripping his chair's armrest tightly. My parents exchange anxious glances. As I approach the microphone, the lights in the ballroom suddenly flicker, and for a moment, we're plunged into darkness. In that brief blackout, I feel a hand grab my arm. Scott's. Don't do this, he hisses in the dark. Think about what you're doing. The lights return almost immediately. I stand on the stage, microphone in hand, the venue deathly quiet. With a gentle smile, I begin my speech. Congratulations on your marriage, Abigail and Scott. My voice is surprisingly calm. It is an honor to be present on my sister's happy day. There's a relieved sigh from the audience. Abigail and Scott slightly relax, and my parents show expressions of relief. My sister and I have shared many memories since we were little. Abigail has always been special to our family, and today she has taken the first step toward creating her own. I pause and look around the room. But since today seems to be a day for truth and announcements, my tone shifts slightly. I'd like to share a story with you all. Abigail half rises from her seat, but Scott pulls her back down. The room is completely silent now. This is a story about a doctor, I continue. A respected obstetrician who specialized in helping couples conceive. This doctor had a secret, though he himself couldn't father children. He had been diagnosed with severe male infertility years before. Murmurs begin to ripple through the crowd. I don't look at Scott or Abigail, but keep my gaze moving across the room. When this doctor married, he kept his condition secret from his wife. And when they couldn't conceive after multiple attempts, instead of being honest, he began to suggest it was her fault. He cultivated this story carefully, first with subtle suggestions, then with outright accusations. Eventually, he convinced not just his wife, but her entire family that she was defective. The murmurs grow louder. Medical professionals in the audience exchange knowing looks. The wife was ostracized, made to feel inadequate. After their divorce, she carried this shame for years, believing something was wrong with her. Meanwhile, the doctor moved on with his former sister-in-law, who worked at the same hospital and had access to medical records. She discovered his secret but chose to keep it, seeing an opportunity. I open my clutch and take out the documents, handing them to a nearby server who begins distributing copies to several tables. The most painful part of this story isn't the doctor's infertility many people face that challenge with honesty and grace. It's the deliberate deception, the years of psychological abuse, and the family who chose comfort over truth. From the middle of the room, a woman stands, the same woman I met at the cafe near the hospital. She's telling the truth, she says loudly. I'm Dr. Foster's patient. He told me the same lie about my own fertility, leading to my divorce. I only discovered the truth when I sought a second opinion last month. The room erupts in commotion. Scott stands up, his face contorted with rage. This is slander. Those records are confidential. This is illegal. Perhaps, I acknowledge calmly. But sometimes the truth demands recognition, no matter the cost. I look directly at my sister. Abigail, I wonder, given Scott's medical history, whose baby are you really carrying? Her face crumples as she rushes from the room. Scott attempts to follow her, but is blocked by several guests examining the medical records. My parents sit frozen in their seats, my father's head bowed in what might be shame. I place the microphone down and descend from the stage with dignity, making eye contact with no one as I head for the exit. Behind me, the ceremony is dissolving into chaos, guests whispering and beginning to leave, confusion and shock dominating the venue. As I open the exit door, I don't look back. I only walk forward. Outside the hotel, I exhale deeply. The setting sun illuminates my face, and for the first time in years, I feel a sense of release, not happiness, not yet, but freedom. You are not defective, I hear my grandmother's voice on the wind. I get into my car and drive away from the wreckage of the past. 1 year later, on a crisp autumn day, I'm unloading groceries from my car in front of my Brooklyn brownstone. Golden leaves swirl around my feet as the wind picks up. Sophie, could you help me with these bags? I call toward the house. A 10-year-old girl with curly hair bounds down the steps. Sophie came into my life 6 months ago, a foster child with trust issues and a gift for art. The adoption paperwork is nearly complete. Is there ice cream? She asks hopefully, peering into the bags. Maybe I smile. But homework first. Inside, my home has transformed from the sterile Manhattan apartment I once inhabited. Colorful artwork, mostly Sophie's, covers the walls. On my desk sits a framed photo of the support group I founded for women who've experienced gaslighting and reproductive coercion. Our motto: your worth is not measured by your ability to bear children. The news about Scott spread quickly after the wedding. Several former patients came forward with similar stories, and the hospital conducted an investigation. He lost his medical license for ethical violations and falsifying records. Last I heard, he was working as a pharmaceutical sales representative in Arizona. Abigail disappeared the day after the wedding. The pregnancy had been a lie, a final attempt to solidify the narrative against me. 3 months ago, she reached out with a tentative apology. We've exchanged a few cautious emails since. Healing will take time, if it comes at all. My parents have made more persistent efforts at reconciliation. My father's heart attack last year seemed to shock him into reassessing his priorities. My mother still struggles to admit her role in my pain, but she tries in her own way. I maintain careful boundaries while leaving the door open to a new, more honest relationship. As Sophie and I prepare dinner, I hear my phone chime with a message. It's from Dr. Janet Collins, a fertility specialist I've been consulting. Though I'm 41 now, I've decided to explore my options for having a biological child on my own. The message contains my latest test results. Everything looks promising. Whether this path leads to a child of my own or not, I've learned that family is something you can build in many ways. Sophie is proof of that. "What are you smiling about?" she asks, setting the table. "Just thinking about how far we've come," I answer. Later that evening, as Sophie sleeps, I sit on my porch swing watching the neighborhood settle into night. I take out my journal and write. Truth sometimes brings pain, but it is what sets us free. Today, I am grateful for second chances and new beginnings. I am not defined by the lies others tell about me, but by the truth I choose to live. I close the journal and look up at the stars. I am Elizabeth Grace, not defective, not broken, just human. And finally, completely free.